Welcome to Marcos and James, the Lisbon Pirates podcast. Good morning, Tiago.
Good morning, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Yeah?
Great, yeah. Well, maybe I'm lying. I'm not doing great.
So what's happening?
Well, the rain, it just won't stop. It just won't stop. So we've had rain for weeks and weeks, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Do you know there's a Portuguese saying about April, the month of April?
Em abril águas mil?
Is that exactly? Yeah. Do you have it in English?
I don't think so.
Because literally it would mean April. How would you translate that?
It rains a lot in April. I mean, literal translation would be like in April, a million showers. Or 1,000 showers, really 1,000. But yeah, we don't have anything like that.
But do you know? I believe that sometimes April, when spring comes, can be the most depressing time for us Portuguese people, because when you're going through winter, and our winters are very mild,
right?
You go through the winter. Okay, it's part of the business. It's part of the deal. But then when spring comes, you're really waiting for the sun, and suddenly it can happen like it happened this year. You had 2 weeks of
intense rain and cold, I think.
But you had some sunny days.
2
weeks ago,
which teased us. It just made us mad.
Yes. And then this rain and cold again, and we in a way we get really upset.
Yeah, absolutely.
In April when it rains.
Which we should be happy. We should be thankful because I did read just recently that the drought levels are over, and so we have enough rain so that we've replenished our water supplies.
Yeah.
And so that is a good thing.
Yes.
So it's interesting, as you know, I grew up in Africa, and so the further away we are from an agricultural society, the more we complain about the rain.
Yeah.
But in Africa, nobody complained about the rain because they saw it as God's blessing.
Yeah.
And the way that God took care of the earth, and the crops grew and all that. So it's interesting because we live in a big city, so we don't quite have that close proximity to what rain does and the importance of rain.
And I think it has a lot to do with our modern Western unbelief.
Yeah.
I once read this phrase from the writer Simone Weil, and she said she had never met. How do you say agricultor?
Agriculture or
a farmer or something.
Yeah.
Someone who works from the works the land.
I think we just say farmer.
Farmer, yeah. And Simone Weil used to say she never met an atheist farmer.
An atheist farmer. Oh, interesting. Yeah. That is fascinating. Yeah.
Because when you live in agricultural culture. You really know that you are dependent on lots of things that are beyond your scope.
Absolutely.
And so it's very unnatural for you not to believe in higher powers.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's jump right in. Let's talk about what's been going on in Lisbon the last couple of days. So this past weekend, we had a visit from, would we call him a famous American? Is he famous? Not here in Europe.
No,
he's not here at all.
Famous.
Like, does anybody even know him?
Of course,
in Europe?
If you said who's his father, then everybody
would know.
Will
Right.
know.
Yeah. So Franklin Graham was here this past weekend, and they did what would you call it? I know it was called Festival de Esperança.
Yeah.
But what would we call that? Where it was? I guess could we call it a crusade?
I know that the Billy Graham Association dropped the term crusade during the 70s
because of the connotations with the actual crusades. Okay. So what do they call it now? Is it like a...
They call it... I heard it, but I don't remember. But they call it celebrations. I don't... And even Hope Festival. So,
right.
It's a more neutral way of framing.
So why is this a big deal for Portugal and even... Let's talk about some of the controversy surrounding it. So let's talk about it all.
I've heard that in some northern European country there was some demonstration against Franklin Graham because people knowing that he, in a way, he was kind of connected or he supported Trump.
Right.
as you know, the anti-Trump sentiment is very strong in Europe. And so I heard that in some places, when Frank would get there, you could have demonstrations against that.
But nothing like that here.
Thank God, nothing like that happened here. One of the good things that in a way surprised me, and I think I can say that we as a Lisbon church, we were not the more involved kind of church in this event, but we were not disconnected also. For instance, one of our members, Adelaide Richardson, she's married with an American that is going to be with us in one of these podcasts, Tracy. But Adelaide, she was emceeing, so she was master of ceremonies there. So there was some people of our church really involved in this event. I was there. It was supposed to happen twice, but it happened 4 times, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
The first place where they were planning this to happen was the biggest auditorium that we have for concerts and stuff like that.
Where's that, Mayo Arena?
Yeah, but it was impossible to do that. I don't know what was the reason. So it got to Campo Pequeno, which is a very it's much more little smaller than. But because you had 4 times, so it went really well. I heard some things from the crew, from the organization, and they were really happy. Good. There were about 1,000 decisions for Christ.
Wow.
And we went to the last one, so Sunday night. And to be very honest, probably if you had to divide in terms of pro or against,
sure.
I would be at the middle. When we think about these big level events,
right.
But one of the things that really it was really important for me, because I was at the 3rd row of the event. Tracy got away to get us so near the stage.
Tracy's connected.
Yeah, Tracy's connected. and I was impressed because it was maybe 200, 300 people coming. And that impressed me.
They came at the very end, like during what we would call an altar call?
Altar call.
Okay, so this is fascinating. And just to let our listeners know, me and Tiago don't talk about beforehand what we're going to talk about. So this is all off the cuff. And this is why I love this program. But I'm fascinating to ask you a question about living here in the middle of, evangelical world, Portuguese evangelical world. I've never heard an altar call here in Portugal.
Yeah.
Okay, so talk about why that. Why is that? And then why would it be important? Why was there an altar call during the Franklin Graham event?
I would say if you go to a more Pentecostal church, and if it happens to be a hip Pentecostal church, and there are a few, probably you'll always hear an altar call.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so at the end of the service, the pastor, the preacher would invite people to come to the front and to give their lives to Christ.
For instance, in Hillsong, it happens every Sunday.
Okay.
Every Sunday. So I would say that in a Baptist background, something like an altar call generally happen in special occasions where we call it evangelistical weeks.
Right.
How would you say?
Kind of like a evangelistic week or evangelistic focus during the week,
or using a more old word, kind of revival.
Revival week, exactly.
We wouldn't have revivals because the term revival is not, at least in Portugal, is not very used. But I grew up in a Baptist church, and so.
So do you remember these times when?
Of course.
But it was normally a very special occasion where you would have
special occasions,
a focus on evangelism, preaching, and then would it be every night that there'd be an altar call, just at the very end?
No, I would say every night. I remember when I was a teen, and even when I was a kid, I remember some Billy Graham crusades that we got to see through the dish, the satellite.
Okay.
And it worked a little bit like it worked right now, but being away from Billy Graham. So we would be preaching in Germany, but we would go
here. Oh, interesting. Okay.
And all the churches would do the same. This preparation, having people to be able to counsel and having an altar call, although they were looking that from the screen. And I remember as a kid also sometimes getting some American teams that would come to our church in Queluz, and they would do this. So a special week, and even when there were those times when churches would call themselves to do that.
Right.
So the pastor would do that altar call. But it's something that in a way it kind of, during the 90s, I guess, it kind of, for some reason, it began feeling old.
Right.
And I would say, at least from my opinion, I would say in these last 10 years, with this kind of reform resurgence, there was some criticism about this.
Absolutely, some backlash about the altar call. And even historically, there's been a question about that. And so, like, even in America, in the American history, the American context, like Charles Finney was the one that really was the father of the altar call. He invented it. But even there's a lot of criticism around that because of the psychological manipulation of trying to elicit a response and using a lot of different techniques and pressure and coercion in a sense. And of course, so what's the balance that we have to have? Like, because one thing I love about the altar call is this invitation. Giving an invitation to come and saying anybody can come and just turn to Christ and have their sins forgiven. But then what's the balance that we have to have with, you know, not having it be manipulation or coercion, but also wanting to extend that invitation?
To be very honest, I never felt that I had to be completely pro or completely against. Because, for instance, if you are talking to a culture like Portuguese one, and we've been talking about this in some other podcasts, I think that one of our really huge problems is making decisions.
Right.
So we are not decision oriented.
Right.
So the altar call or something like that, in a way, it really it goes really
pressure oriented. Right. Really.
And in a way, I think it can be spiritually healthy because it's not a good thing about us Portuguese people delaying or being afraid of making their own decisions. It's very different in America. I would say that you're a very decision-oriented.
Yeah, exactly.
Culture.
And I would say people maybe that's changing a little bit as the society changes as well, but I would say just generally speaking, it's very decision-oriented. And then I think the other thing that is very fascinating about American culture, it's individual-focused. So when you put those two things together, I think the altar call just naturally kind of came out. So what you're saying, though, in a Portuguese culture, with the difficulty of making a decision combined with, and we've talked about this as well, a group decision. You know, because individual is probably not the most important thing when you're talking about decisions. It looks different, but
but that doesn't mean that an altar call should be a bad thing. In a way, it can be a really good thing because it goes so much against the grain. Of course.
And in a sense, let me ask you this: in a sense, don't we do that every Sunday when we gather and preach the gospel?
I hope so.
But if we preach the gospel faithfully, aren't we extending that invitation to people? And I understand that maybe we don't do it in a clear enough way, and maybe we need to work on that and do that better. But I think if we preach the gospel faithfully, we are saying, come, repent, turn from your sin and trust and believe upon Jesus, right?
In theory, I think we should try to be very clear that every time we are preaching the gospel, we are inviting people to trust God and let the Holy Spirit call people. And of course, it strikes a very delicate balance, which really belongs to the Spirit to strike that balance between our will as preachers to see the gospel happening in people's lives. But at the same time, knowing that it's not you going to press on that. Of course, that I can also understand one of the criticisms about this reform resurgence, and in a way we are part of that. We are part of this reform resurgence. I can understand that even in Campo Pequeno. So when I was listening to Franklin Graham, in a way it's funny because he's not a very gifted preacher. He's not a bad preacher,
right.
but his preaching is really simple.
Right.
And that was refreshing because he's really straightforward about heaven and hell. And
interesting. Yeah.
today, listening to someone talking to some small thousands, talking about I believe in hell,
right.
and the only way to get out of that is Jesus. Today, that's really impressive.
And it's somewhat scandalous if that's your message, right? Yeah.
And it's even shocking for evangelical believers, because one of the good things of this Festival da Esperança, and I don't want to be cynical saying this, but when there's American dollar, and Billy Graham Association comes, and of course they pay the thing. They are not waiting for the Portuguese to pay all of this.
Right.
So we Portuguese kind of
you take it.
We do. You say we do, because of course you're as Americans, the Americans are paying for everything of this, and so you gather. Almost every kind of evangelical Portuguese church, which is a good occasion to be together with. If it was not for something like that, it would be hard.
And that would be my question, because I'm fascinated about how this all works. If we had decided, just as a church or a group of churches or anything, hey, let's do a 3-day evangelistic, kind of deal. And we just had a Portuguese preacher or a couple of Portuguese preachers, would we have the same turnout as what happened when Franklin Graham comes to this place?
No. Because let's be fair, things are organized, so there's a big scale, and that always impresses people. And in a way, and I want to be fair, I would say that I'm not shocked that all the environment plays a big part in the moment that anyone stands up and goes to the front. Right. Because I think that the environment, we are environment influenced people.
Absolutely.
We are people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would say that I really believe that being in a place like Campo Pequeno, with all those lights, with all those music, it's really exciting. Even I'm 40, but as you know, in my mind I'm 80 because I'm a very old person.
You're an old soul.
Yeah, old soul. I'm a very old soul. But even I or even me, I never know if even I was in a way I wanted to go there and accept Jesus again, because there's an environment, and that's why there's a good kind of how would you say? There's a good kind of not desconfiança. I'm forgetting the word desconfiança.
Distrust, or
there's a good kind of distrust. If that distrust translates into we have to do more than this event.
Absolutely,
so follow up.
See, and that's what I was going to say, because I was going to say, listen, as a missionary, I'm very dismayed. I'm all for the big event. I'm all for Franklin Graham coming. I think it's fantastic. I'm all for the 1,000 decisions that were made. And my hope and prayer is that we can follow up with those decisions, that churches and believers will intentionally follow up with these decisions and begin to disciple these believers, these young believers. And so that's my hope and prayer. But as a missionary, I'm really unsettled. Here's why. Because we shouldn't need Franklin Graham to come here.
Yeah, of course.
We really shouldn't. In fact, that's, missiologically speaking, that's the least effective thing we could ever do. Yeah. But why is it that we always turn to that kind of stuff?
But you can't get around this, and I really felt this. I'm going to try to explain. Because you go there, and as a Portuguese, you really feel that you're going to a very foreign thing.
It is, exactly.
Foreign.
So is that okay?
But there's a good side and there's a bad side.
Okay.
Let me try to go to the bad side first. There's a bad side. It's not necessarily a bad side, but anything can happen.
Sure.
And as you know, we talk a lot about this in our church. And being foreigners, you can get away with things.
Sure.
Even there was this musical moment with a guy in a cowboy hat.
Was there really?
Playing guitar, but almost playing almost flamenco, and it was really, in a way, it was awkward. I was thinking, this just doesn't. That's the absurd part. But because all of this is so exceptional, the Portuguese will take this.
Right.
And so, and there's, of course, I know that being Franklin Graham talking about hell, and you have to make a decision. He's a foreigner, so the Portuguese will give him some slack.
Some leniency, some slack.
If it was a Portuguese preacher, probably.
Really?
Yeah. And but there's a good side of that too. And I was telling this to my wife Ana Ruth during the service, during the thing. Right now, lots of Brazilian.
Right.
And Ana Paula Valandão, she's a very famous singer in Brazil.
Okay.
She's not. It's not the kind of music that I enjoy, but she was there, and so lots. Right now, being evangelical, you know that being evangelical in Portugal it translates
Brazilian
to
influence.
Yeah.
Okay.
And lots of ciganos, lots of gypsies.
Very interesting.
And how can I explain this? In a way, I was telling Ruth, this is my people. I love when I go outside of my free, reformed, doctrinally sound church, and suddenly I'm in the midst of all these wild and crazy and different evangelicals, because I'm a part of that. And
absolutely.
So I know that for Portuguese eyes, evangelical faith is foreign, is wild, is strange. And in this sense, I'm okay with that. So maybe it's a good thing.
So maybe this is fascinating, because maybe we don't need to domesticate the gospel in. You know what I'm saying? And so why don't we just let it run wild, and it is what it is. And if it means that there's these crazy wild-eyed Brazilians. I love my Brazilian friends, by the way. But you know what I'm saying? We just let it be. Now here's missiologically where I just want to. I want to go after is that how can we let the gospel run wild and free in the Portuguese culture as well? Because I think what the problem here that we come into every single time is that it seems like the gospel just is exploding in every part, but not in the indigenous Portuguese population. And so that's what really bothers me every day. That I just go, God, why can't my Portuguese brothers and sisters understand this and work this out in their own context? And that's the hard part, right?
And so let me try to be very European, postmodern,
good.
answering to that question. In a way, don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Because, and let me try to give our own illustration coming from Lapa. You as a pastor, you're an American pastor.
Right.
Of course, every time you're here, you're talking in Portuguese. But as you know, and your Portuguese is great.
But everybody knows.
But everybody knows that
everybody knows
that you're an American. And suddenly, for us as a church, not being worried about having an American pastor, and not being worried about, because of this pastoral American family being at the core of our church. Of course, there's a lot of good American influence. Not worrying about that, it's something that I really believe comes from the gospel. Because we are not preaching a specific culture. We are not preaching to people. We have to be American like Mark and Anna are, but we are okay because the gospel calls all kinds of people. And for us, in a way, it's freeing. It frees us. And so, in a way, and I know this is a big thing for you because you're an American missionary and you want to do the right thing
Right.
as a missionary. But in a way, don't worry too much. Don't worry too much, because it will alleviate even the environment.
Right,
People
right.
are okay.
Yeah.
They have an American pastor.
Yeah.
And so, first part of the answer, don't worry too much. In a way, of course, worry a little bit.
Yeah.
Worry a little bit, because, and even this is a paradox. We are 4 pastors here, and the most concerned, I always...
The most concerned about...
the most concerned pastor about reaching Portuguese people, who is this guy in these 4 pastors that we are?
I don't know who.
Who is? You are. So
Right.
you are.
Right.
Because generally, because right now, in the last year, we had lots of people coming from Brazil, and right now we have a kind of Brazilian community in our church. And you were, in a good way, worried that we should never lose
Right.
the grip on trying to get mostly Portuguese.
Right.
Of course, the church is made of people from all over the world, American, Brazilian, you name it. But you are the most concerned about this. And even that, it's a good thing, because remembers me that, of course, church is universal.
Right,
So you can come from all kinds of parts of the world and be a part of our local church or another one. But at the same time, if we are in Portugal, we should be really worrying more about our Portuguese people.
Right.
So in a way, don't worry. In a way, worry a little bit.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap this podcast up, should we give an altar call?
Let me just ask you: have you? I never made a classical altar call, but there are probably a couple of times where I kind of pressured some, not altar calls. I never called, but some time for making decisions.
Right.
It already happened with me. What's your experience on that?
Yeah, and of course my experience is very different because I grew up in Africa, and so it was very different. I didn't grow up necessarily in a traditional Baptist church in America where there was an altar call every week. But of course, coming back to the States and stuff, experiencing that and understanding that. And then of course, probably much along with you, as I kind of got more into the kind of Reformed theology, I kind of backed away from those altar calls. But I think the more that I grow and mature in it, I realize that I really want to go hard after asking people to make a decision.
Yeah.
We just don't have a lot of time with people to mess around and kind of, and so even in this Portuguese culture, I think one of the good things about is just kind of putting it there and maybe putting a little bit of good pressure on people. And so I have a lot of respect for the altar call in the sense of it's causing and it's creating a decision moment, because we want to tell people every time we preach the gospel, repent of your sins, turn to Jesus. He can save you today. Today can be the day of salvation. But at the same time, balance that with it not becoming overly man-centered. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. And just being something that we're trying to do in a way to elicit a response, and then we're not worried about the rest of it. And so, I think the altar call is maybe something that maybe has fallen out of favor, but maybe is something that we should. I don't know. Could we redo it, or kind of a revamped kind of altar call, a modified altar call, or something like that?
One of the things that really encouraged me this Sunday when I was at Festival da Esperança, there's a hunger for. In America, lots of things happening like that, but there's hunger for big events, and I remember during the 90s. At least in Europe or in Portugal, we were kind of cynical about big events. We were just saying, even in the beginning of the emergent movement, was very anti-event. Right. And there's a place for big events, because there's even some eschatological quality in that, because you have a glimpse of what it means to be with a multitude of people praying and praising God, and for me that should play a part. We should be trying more of this coming from our own initiative.
Right. Good. Well, as always, we want to invite our listeners to be a part of what we're doing here in Lisbon. And one way you can be a part of it is to come to our Portuguese service. And we start at 11:30 in the morning every Sunday here at Igreja da Lapa. And then also we have our English service once a month. And so this month, in the month of April, we'll do it on the last Sunday of April at 5 p.m.
Yeah.
So you're welcome to come.
Yeah. Please do.
See you at Lapa.
Yeah. See you at Lapa.